DeShare is the only one we're missing, but we've got a quorum and we're after 5. So if everybody's good, I will call us to order. All right. Okay, start off reading our mission statement in this time. Ankeny Community Schools is unified in its commitment, passion, and vision, so every learner is prepared to achieve a lifetime of personal success. All right, in accordance with social distancing guidelines due to this pandemic, the public may view this board meeting by dialing 1-408-518-9388, access code 963-201-539, or virtually. I'm going to read the link. It's also on the district website, bit.ly/2UOXF lowercase dq. Got that. I need a recommendation to approve and accept this agenda without amendment.
Motion.
Second.
Hey, any questions about the agenda? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Jen, are you getting all those? All right, any opposed? All right, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll stand.
I feel like I should too.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we've got 2 information-only items tonight. The first is the COVID-19 education delivery. I will pass that off to Bruce.
One of the things that continues to evolve is the information that we receive from the Iowa Department of Health and the Department of Education and the governor's office. Today, the governor announced that schools would remain closed in the same status until the end of April. And I repeat that schools would remain closed until the end of April. And at that point, I believe that further information will be coming forth. And so the district is charged with picking one of 2 choices, and they're very different. I believe that you should have received from me, which is also on the Iowa Department of Education website, the 2 choices that the Department of Ed is recognizing, and you must choose one of these 2. If you do not, and I shouldn't say you must choose one of these 2, if you do not choose one of these 2, you will be required to make up the days from April 12th or 13th to the end of the year. And so are there any questions yet?
I watched the news conference today with the governor, and my interpretation was that the only way to not make up school is if you did the required only. Am I wrong?
You are not correct. you can choose the voluntary educational enrichment opportunities, which is what schools are currently doing across the state. And then the other choice that is being offered is the required educational services. And as you go through, you can see that the required educational services really puts an emphasis on putting a lot of the things that we do every day in school, including information on IEPs and making sure that FAPE is being reviewed. And so who can provide this? Obviously, both schools, public and non-public. Do we need permission to do the voluntary? No, but we will need to choose which one we need, that Ankeny will choose unless we want to be making days up. And I don't believe any of the board would want that. And I believe the date is April 10th that we have to choose. And we require students to participate in voluntary, no, but the required educational services, yes. Both of them, as you can see, are word for word the methods that you can use.
I have a question. I did watch the press conference today, and the head of the Department of Education did say you could use a hybrid of the two.
Yes.
Varied by class. Is that correct?
And what that means, Amy, is that we could choose that the elementary, we may not feel as educators, as a board, as a community, there are lots of opinions, as you might guess, out there. But as far as what does online kindergarten look like, and so we would choose to go voluntary, whereas in high school, we could choose to go the required route. That would be the hybrid route that she is describing. And I do want to talk about this because this doesn't, what I'm describing to you requires no board action. And so this is information only. This is something that I would like some feedback. If you have it, I believe the teachers, some teachers have gotten together and provided you their views as well. If you go to the next page, page 2, are there equity concerns we should consider? And under both, you always consider equity. I don't think that you would say, well, no, you should never consider equity. However, when you enter the required part, the IEP teams must reconvene to determine how FAPE will be provided through continuous learning methods. And so we would have roughly, I would guess, maybe 1,000, give or take. 1,100 IEPs that would take a lot of time, a lot of people meeting to get together to meet the requirement. Under the voluntary consideration does not mean that equity is ensured, but that it's provided to the extent impossible. So we're not having to redo IEPs under the voluntary educational enrichment opportunities. Now, as superintendent, I can tell you that if we find out that a child is needing something and we can provide it, we don't need to have the required educational service model to make sure that's happening. I mean, there's what's legal, and then there's what's ethical, and what I believe what the board signed up for. And that is doing what's right by kids. And so, can we grade materials submitted? Under the voluntary one, no. You can provide feedback, but there are no grades. Under the required stuff, you have to provide a grade. And we award credit. There's no credit to be given under the voluntary educational enrichment opportunities, but you can award credit under the required educational services. And AEA is responsible for providing help under both, although they're much more engaged in the required than they would be in voluntary. And if I'm right on this, I don't believe speech will be offered in either case. That's a service that will not be offered just due to the sheer amount of people needing it within the last 2 months of school. Is school considered open? And the definition is no for voluntary. We are not considered open now. And then is it considered open under educational services required? The answer would be yes, but it wouldn't be open.
Not physically open.
Not physically open. And can we choose to work accomplished during school closure in a competency base, which is not an Ankeny? There are schools that are competency based. I think Van Meter may be a school that may be competency based, which is a step beyond reference based grading. And so, and then what application, and it's an optional tool, and if you could maybe step to the mic, and Anne attended I like the timing of this, a 4 o'clock meeting from the Department of Ed. So we just found out at 2:30 this information, and then Anne at 4 o'clock found out some of the new rules. And I don't know if they are new rules or not new rules. But the voluntary templates, part of it is to help you to determine possibly which route you should be headed. And then the professional learning for educators. And I would say most schools, although they're messing with it, unless you are CAM, unless you are Des Moines, or there's one other school district in Iowa, you are not set up to be a virtual school. And so, Ann, would you like to explain anything that, and we can see you.
Yeah, you'll have to mute your mic.
Yeah. Yep, I'll mute mine.
Could you explain anything that you learned in your 4 o'clock meeting? And if you didn't learn anything, then please feel free to say so.
Actually, the steering committee was, it was.
Hold on.
Hold on, we can't hear you.
Samantha,
He's really fumbling with something.
I think, can Ann unmute Jennifer and then mute me? And if
Okay, that should be done now.
The webinar was helpful. The webinar was helpful, and that it did give us some additional guidance. And I also.
Or you might have to turn your speaker down. Someone's speaking, we're not hearing it.
Can't hear you.
Nope, we can't hear it.
Samantha needs to unmute. Lori, she needs to unmute Lori and mute me.
thanks for everyone's patience.
It's fine. It's fine.
Technology, when it works, it's great. Is this working better for everyone?
I can hear you well.
Great.
Okay, good.
I can hear you.
I was informed by the fact that the governor did give us the April 30th date, although I must tell you I was a little surprised given the amount of work and guidance in the plans that Bruce has just described. I was expecting actually a bit longer. Having said that, I was also pleased to know that she's planning on giving us a 2-week notice as to whether or not we will extend beyond April 30th. This would mean that by April 16th, we should have some additional guidance, or perhaps even by the 17th. Now, we do have until the 10th to submit our application, and that's only necessary if we're going to go with the required model for any one of our levels. And as Bruce mentioned, we don't have to have, say, elementary versus secondary. We could choose to do 8th grade on up. We could choose to do 5th grade on up. But what we can't do is we can't pull out individual courses and that sort of thing, as Bruce had mentioned, for obvious reasons on that. What is also nice is that we can count and allow whatever credit we just determine to be reasonable for students for work that has been completed so far. So imagine that the actual semester came to an end prior to spring break, and imagine that we go with a voluntary model. What will happen with students, for example, who are halfway through their required government course for graduation? In fact, we have a latitude to be able to call that course complete and to award whatever grade we believe the student would have earned up to that point in time. Now, what is missing is the half semester of learning that student would not have been able to acquire. In a voluntary system, they would be able to do just that. Can we say that in a voluntary system, it would have the level of rigor that we would find in a required? I would say that's probably unlikely. So these are difficult decisions to consider. As we compare ourselves on a rubric that the State Department has provided for us, and it comes out of the state of Minnesota, and it is called the School Closure Learning Continuity Readiness Rubric. Well, other than having a really wacky long name, it's basically a rubric that looks at the level of readiness for providing online education for students, or in this case, remote and some different forms of virtual required learning, from being less ready to being more ready. So we look at things like leadership, digital infrastructure, training, support, communications, resources, access, etc. I would say that our district is not at the most ready level in any of those areas, and I named but a few of a number of different criteria that they have set out. I do believe that we have pockets of exquisite readiness. I know that we have, and I have said it many times, the best teachers, not only in the state of Iowa, we have the best teachers in the country. I'm confident of that. But do we have, and have we invested in that level of 100% so that we can say with certainty all teachers are prepared at high levels at this moment in time? I say that that's probably not the case. I do think that we can provide some engaging and enriching opportunities, and know that we'll support whatever direction that the district decides to go based on your feedback. We have now and are prepared with a steering committee that's representative of teachers, administrators, academic services staff. We are ramping up our current efforts so that we can tackle even more challenges as we move forward, regardless of which direction we determine that we need to go. But the decision needs to be made fairly quickly. We have been told that when we submit our request, should we go with the required model, that we'll have a turnaround of about 24 hours. We also know that time is of the essence, so we'll want to make a decision soon, and I would not recommend that we wait until the April 10th deadline. If at all possible, I would recommend that we move more quickly. And again, with the feedback from those that I mentioned, and a template for continuous learning provided by the State Department to guide us through some of those questions, I'm confident we could be prepared whichever direction that we take. I will finally conclude with input that the academic services staff has gathered from principals, from representative teachers, working with them closely throughout this past couple of days. And there is a level of reluctance as to the extent to which we can fully provide the required learning with the level of rigor our students currently experience in a face-to-face setting. There is a level of reluctance as to whether or not we could do that with 100% fidelity. And Bruce has received quite a bit of communication even in the last day or so, as you may well have received. And we want to set our teachers up for success. We want our students to have the best possible experience. But we also have to realize that there are a number of competing commitments that families are dealing with, whether it's economic. I mean, simply imagine that you have one or more parents working from home, and you have several of your own children that you are feeling responsible for in terms of their education. And many of those parents are not, in fact, most of them are not licensed master teachers, as ours are here at Ankeny. And then to be able to ask yet our teachers to continue to mind their 25 students, or in some cases more than 100 plus students, and then still manage their own households. I would say that it would be a very steep climb, not because we don't have the best quality teachers. We do have, but we also have a number of those competing commitments that I have some concerns about. But I'm willing, as is the entire team, ready to take whatever direction you suggest.
Anne?
Yes.
I appreciate a lot of your points you just said at the end of your little speech there, because there are a lot of competing things, And so whatever we do, I think it needs to be realistic and doable so that we can have success versus chaos.
Yeah, Jim, I would agree with that for sure. I know, there's so many houses that you don't have enough computers for the number of kids that you have in them. And my house is one of them. But
Bandwidth.
oh yeah, I mean bandwidth, and I mean I'm one of those people who has to go to work, and so I can't sit with my second grader at the computer all day. But just when it comes to, are you guys open to the idea of that hybrid of looking at, voluntary versus required based on grade level or?
Absolutely, we're open to whatever direction that the board provides. I will tell you, though, that the consistency of the fidelity and ability to implement the true, pure, highly rigorous online option would not be consistent even by a grade band. So, for example, we might have 8-12 as an option.
Mhm.
And if we did have that as an option, we might find pockets of teachers who may still be struggling to some extent. And now they may also, again, with this steep learning curve, and we're dealing with a time frame between now, the submission and approval of the request, the expedited waiver, and then a deadline of April 30th. That is what may concern me. Many would be ready and able to do that. And on a voluntary basis could provide that and make that available to students, but simply wouldn't have to meet such a strenuous high bar.
So I'm not understanding, Anne. Are you saying that if we choose the required method, that it has to follow the syllabus that was presented at the beginning of the semester? Because I see in either scenario, the voluntary or involuntary, that the rigor is going to be different. And I'm not sure why that makes a difference, whether it's voluntary or not voluntary, as long as we pick the rigor that it's capable of for the situation that we're in.
Yes, and the guidance for the required learning is that the rigor has to be equivalent to that which took place prior to. Now, I will also tell you, and this was stated on the webinar by the department personnel themselves, we do not have police walking through our classrooms monitoring rigor. For that reason, we could choose to add a full semester grade and say to a student, what you have completed up to the day that spring break opened, we're willing to provide you with a grade for that work. We also have the option of saying to students who might have had incomplete work or might be failing, that if we were to adopt a voluntary model and then resume in May, that student could continue to work very hard in the month of April, make up those unfinished assignments, come back in and show their level of expertise and completion of projects in May, and still be able then to receive a grade in May. It's as if this month of April we are on hiatus only unless we choose, unless it's on a voluntary basis. So that doesn't necessarily mean that we have doomed students to failure because they were caught off guard the last day before spring break and then everything sort of fell apart on them. There's also an option, although it's probably not as attractive, for students to come back and finish as a fifth-year senior, and that certainly would not be attractive to any seniors that I have known. So those are considerations for us to make. We know that if we go with the voluntary, we cannot award grades. We absolutely cannot, because again, it's voluntary and not required.
Grades being awarded for the time that we are on hiatus.
Correct. So if we go with the voluntary model, we cannot award grades.
But you can award a grade for what they did up to this point and then give them the opportunity to learn more voluntarily, correct?
That's correct.
And then if we were to do voluntary, would you have this team of administrators and teachers that you've been working with have a consistent delivery of something for each grade level, each content area that's voluntary, so that all the kids get the same voluntary options versus a mixed bag with a variety of different teachers?
That would be the goal, Jim. And again, with several hundred teachers in households of themselves, the level of fidelity for that replication, I can tell you with confidence, our staff would do the very best they could. Whether they're working as PLCs, they're very used to working together to plan and do their work. I can imagine that it might even be an example of, here are the standards we would have addressed in April, and we're going to prioritize among those so that we're going to focus in this area and perhaps that area, because it simply isn't possible in a voluntary method to address all 100% of what would have happened if we had been in an ideal situation as in years past. So I would say they would do their very best. But again,
Right.
Can I guarantee exactness? I'm not sure I could do that, nor would you want me to, I'm sure.
Right. So it appears to me that we need to strike a balance between what is doable academically, but also keep in mind the physical restraints of people not being together, and even the mental health of families and students that are dealing with this whole medical crisis that's happening in our country. So there has to be a balance somewhere in there where we do maybe the voluntarily thing and award people grades, but still give them the opportunity to learn as much as possible within our constraints.
That would be an option. And another thing to consider is we can offer pass-fail grades, and all of the regions in Iowa have agreed to accept those. There may still be organizations beyond our control, for example, the NCAA and calculations they might make, for example, students that might be preparing for a Division I school, caution about a pass-fail grade because those would calculate at the lowest common denominator, and that would be a disadvantage to our students. So those are all considerations.
Lots to consider.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Ryan, is that you?
Yes.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Ryan.
I just want to understand in either option, if we come back in May, the children and the kids and all of the older kids, sorry, my terminology is off. Everybody's going to have to demonstrate a level of academic knowledge that they should have in a normal May. Is that right? I mean, they're going to have to prove that they have progressed the way that they should have had they been in school. Is that correct?
That is what we have been told by the department, and that is the expectation. But again, Ryan, we have thousands of schools in Iowa and even thousands more classrooms. The extent to which there's any desire to police that is nil. I can say that with confidence. In fact, I can tell you that even for the adjustment of graduation requirements, for example, they have said, be innovative, consider how you might make this work. So if we were to go with required, while the application requests evidence of the extent to which we would be equally rigorous, for example, we would do our best to meet that. But I don't know that if we, I don't know that I'm sure that that's not going to be monitored by the department at this point in time.
Sure.
And they will remind us we're local control. So they said, we've never monitored what your expectations were before this. We will not monitor what the expectations are now.
We decide if our students meet our standards.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the second scenario that could possibly happen, where school never resumes again for this year, it sounds like if we were to go with the required option, that some students could be at a disadvantage rather than if we had just gone with a voluntary option. Then they would have just received the grade that the teacher would have assume that they would have kept getting. Do I understand that correctly?
I'm not sure I'm following you, Ryan.
So if a student is getting an A right now in a particular class and school does not resume this year, if we go to the required option and that student, it happens to be in a household that has struggles with bandwidth, has struggles with online learning, all of a sudden that student struggles, and now instead of an A when they were in school, now they get a C. That's a disadvantage for that particular student. But
in that scenario that you described, that would be. That is possible, again, based upon some of the other factors involved.
So, but let's say if we went with the optional option, in that scenario, that same student, they probably would still receive an A if we never return back to school, because the most probable grade that they would have received had school resumed. Is that correct?
That's correct. And if we do return after April 30th, and that's currently what we know to be fact, we are closed, school closure now until April 30th, then that student could continue their learning. Naturally, we would want to adjust the expectations for that course, but that's also a local decision.
And kind of outside. Sorry, Jim, just 1 second. So, and all of this, the 10th, 11th, 12th graders, even potentially 9th graders who are doing dual enrollment, AP, those are an outside subset of all of this because they are considered college.
Yes. And they are proceeding as planned.
And they are doing as according to those classes are outside of our control. Okay,
That's
good.
correct.
Okay, Jim, go ahead.
So that's a good thing we don't have to worry about because they're still doing it, correct?
That's correct.
That you just talked about. That's good. I didn't realize that. Thank you. So let's just say in Ryan's scenario, we go back to school in May. Well, obviously, some kids will have done more the last month than others. They're going to be in different places, just like when they come back for the summer. So wherever you get them, you take them where they are and you move forward. And if we don't go the rest of the year, let's just say you got a kid going into 5th grade, they had 3/4 of a 4th grade year. In 5th grade, they're obviously going to have a little bit of 4th grade at the end of 4th grade to get caught up to be ready to go in 5th grade. There's going to have to be some flexibility on catching some kids up on some skills that they missed at the end of the year.
Yes, and even should we return, even the month that we've missed, the teachers we were visiting with this morning could cite gaps, perhaps maybe in Algebra 1 and some of the algebra thinking. Yes, and the ripple of this throughout the system will be felt into the future.
Absolutely.
And that's regardless of whatever decision we make.
And every single district is going to be having this same thing. We are not an island in all of this.
Correct. We are all in the same place.
The whole nation, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say that I find our staff to be, as I mentioned, talented, but also among the most dedicated. I also know that our families are highly engaged. And I know that our students, by and large, the overwhelming majority of our students are highly motivated. Now, those are things we can celebrate at Ankeny schools that may not be the case in many other districts throughout the country. So I am affirmed by that. In other words, I believe that whatever negative impact this might have, we do have a number of favors, a number of benefits working in our favor that will help us mitigate these challenges moving forward.
I'm just trying to envision every household in Ankeny and how it would look voluntarily versus the required. And I think, big picture wise, I want to give everyone the opportunity, but if you do the required, I think the stress and parents who are not teachers feeling like they need to be teachers, I think it could freak some people out a little bit.
And I'll be honest with you, and perhaps Jim, you and I might both admit that if we were teaching some of the upper level chemistry or science, upper level courses, mathematics, I would struggle making sense of that with my child. That was not an area where I have any level of expertise, right? So we could be setting, at the secondary level, we could be setting our parents up for a very stressful time.
On top of the challenges just their kids are
that they
having
already facing.
already. I'll kind of ask a devil's advocate question. Katie, you have a question too?
Go ahead. I just wanted to speak my thoughts on it, but go ahead, Lori. I can go after you.
So kind of to add on to Ryan's comment earlier about the optional versus required, say we go with the optional, but instead of that kid having an A before spring break, they were at a D or a C because they had some incomplete work or they had some struggles. Does that optional versus required, which one gives or can create a better path for them to recover from?
In that instance, the required would create a better path because we could award and adjust and amend those grades. But remember, we are speaking about April 30th. So is it possible for that student to dive into the optional throughout the month of April and with feedback and interaction with his or her teacher, work very hard to be fully prepared to dive in May 1st when we allegedly would be back in session and complete and turn the work in there? That would be that would give that student an opportunity to make up for some of the lost time, because we caught them off guard. They may have thought, I've got the rest of the semester to finish this up. Actually, I had a child who would have thought exactly like that. So if that were the case, May is still an option. Now, here's the disadvantage. If we don't reopen in May and we are on optional, then there is no chance for that student to make it beyond coming back as a year senior.
Okay. And it's one or the other by April 10th. There's not, we're going to be optional through April 30th and then change to required in May to round things out.
At this point, I would have to seek an answer on that from the department. I had to end the webinar early to drive across town to be here. But I will tell you that we do have additional meeting tomorrow morning on that.
Because there might be, not only us, but other districts that just can't get a required thing together in 8 days plus a weekend. That
will span from the 13th through the 30th.
Right.
So we mind that in there as well. And now that's
it would be
a very steep. Certainly not for everyone. And please hear me say that.
Right.
We have teachers right now that already teach. They all teach graduate level online courses. We have teachers right now doing this, interacting, teaching courses on how to do this with master's degrees in how to do this.
Right.
But that isn't every teacher.
Right. Okay, Katie, I don't want to forget you.
No, that's okay. I've got lots of thoughts, so this could come like a stream of consciousness. But I just think if we were to go with the required route, we are gonna first and foremost punish some marginalized populations. To Ryan's point, we're gonna have a number of families that don't have the capability of doing this. We've run a pretty good home here in our house, and we've struggled in the last 2 weeks very much to meet the needs of our 3 kids. And so to think of the additional pressures on families who are trying to navigate a new dynamic of work from home and homeschooling their kids, for required credit where attendance has to be taken, work has to be turned in, just the monitoring that goes on with that really concerns me. Never mind, to Bruce's point, how we would, the manpower it would take to amend that many IEPs and work with our students with disabilities and the training that would need to go into that for teachers and to include families in that process seems really daunting. I've definitely been in many meetings with Anne and heard from many other large districts, and many of them are choosing that voluntary option for that very purpose. I just think Rome wasn't built in a day. We didn't, for example, create this Orbis program in 10 days. And that's exactly what we're asking our folks to do by going fully online with required. Just because teachers have a computer and students have a computer does not mean we can magically go online to online learning with the rigor that Anne has spoken to. And so I just think we have to give a lot of grace to our families and the families of our educators in thinking about this. I think the voluntary option gives us a lot more space to grow and support families in ways that families can access it, you know, what they're kind of capable of managing, what works for their home. I just think that's a good opportunity, a good space for our community, given the spectrum of dynamics that we have going on in the thousands of homes in our community right now. So I also wanted to just thank Anne and the academic services team for the website that they put up this week. That's been helpful for our family to kind of access our different kids' needs. I will say there was a 5th grade math problem I could not do today. So Anne's point, you know, it could be challenging for our parents for some of those high school kids. So that's it.
Thanks, Katie.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Is there anyone else, Aaron or Amy, that has any questions for Anne? Since I can't see you, I just want to make sure I'm catching everyone.
Yep. Mine would be more like Katie's, more of a stream of consciousness a little bit. I would say either option we choose, I think we should strive to have the most rigor we possibly can provide our students, regardless of which side we choose. I think we need to drive as much as we can and not use the difficulty of it as just an excuse to not try to get where we need to go. There's a lot of learning that can go in this. I understand the difficulties of it. You know, personally, I'm thinking about, you know, what does it look like if we just do 9-12, 10-12, 11-12, you know, for that matter, especially those that are moving towards graduation or looking at it. Instead of doing all 12,000 students, you know, is it a couple hundred students? What would that look like? And does that make sense? You know, I don't know that I'm advocating for it, but I don't want to just say, well, it's hard, let's not do it. I think we've got enough smart people to figure some of this stuff out. And I do think that our community expects us to provide as much as we possibly can. Again, voluntary or required, I can kind of go back and forth on that a little bit, but in terms of the quality and the level of what's available, I think we need to strive as high as we can.
Appreciate those comments, Aaron. And I would also add that with the voluntary model, that isn't necessarily mean take the easy route, because as you know, and Katie mentioned it, it took us about a week to pull together a very detailed website with resources that were not as generic and broad as most of the districts were providing around us. But that extra time paid off, because now what we have are more targeted activities specific to student needs, and that I think you would see also if we went with a voluntary approach. You would not see a minimum from our teachers. You would see, we can absolutely disguise the limit, even if it is voluntary. We're not necessarily bound to the most simplistic. You're following my thinking on that.
No, and I appreciate that feedback, and I apologize if I sounded, you know, like we were taking an easy route, because I know there's a lot of work that is going into it, has gone into it, will continue to go into it. It's just a lot of the dialogue I hear, not only here or from emails or even in the media, about, well, it's hard and we can't do this, and we can't do this. And I'd rather spend more time and let's do what we can do and maximize that as much as we possible. The other point I'll make, and then I'll give up my turn, or question I have is, do we have any thoughts or desires or interest in reaching out to our student community and our parent community in terms of what they're thinking? I know we've gotten a few emails in terms of, you know, direction or ideas and what have you. That'd be one question. And the other one, my daughter, who happens to teach in Oklahoma, and they've closed for the year, she's already had her PLC meetings, administrative meetings, and department meetings, you know, online the last couple of weeks. And she was asked to survey all of her students. Hey, do you have Wi-Fi at home? Hey, do you have a computer at home? So they were starting to gather and understand what they could do. They went the voluntary route. They came up with a curriculum that they were going to do, and then because they're closed for the year, they're going to do 5 weeks of school and then be done. You know, we don't have that in front of us necessarily at the moment, but you know, just the idea of just taking the opportunity to understand what we do have in terms of accessibility and equity, you know, even within our own student population.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that excellent suggestion as well.
Do we have any sort of data on challenges that families might have at our hands right now?
No, we are developing a survey as we speak. In fact, we started that yesterday and are working closely to finish that soon. But we do know that when we do identify a deficit area, some of the initial explorations is even getting our hands on hotspots now. If we did have the capacity to get those and bring those into some of the families' homes that don't have that access, we couldn't expect to even have those orders filled until next fall.
Yeah.
So even if we wanted to provide it, not to mention that's an expense.
Is there any questioning or information gathered from that survey potentially on not just accessibility to Wi-Fi and computers, but accessibility to supervision and guidance during the day? Because you might have, like, you know, if you have older siblings at home, I mean, I have, you know, my kids are from 2nd grade to 12th grade. Well, if the 9th and 12th graders are busy doing their schoolwork, they can't supervise the elementary younger siblings. You know, if there's a parent working from home, they have to work if they want to keep their job. I have a job where I can't be at home during the day, you know, so if things like attendance are required, who's going to supervise those kids to make sure they're doing it?
So not yet in the survey, but certainly we could include that. But just the anecdotal data I've received from neighbors and or friends who have reached out, and frankly, some staff members that we know are being asked to work virtually and still have children at home. They have said it's been very difficult, even with some teenage students and children there to help.
Oh,
Let's be honest. It's difficult to keep a 2nd grader focused in a classroom, right? And that's by some of our master's level expert teachers.
Right.
And to ask a 15-year-old to try and do that is not always going to be productive.
No, you know, with all of their own
and then
internal stressors at this time too.
Those are things to consider.
But yeah, you may have parents who can supervise their kids doing online activities, but it's going to be at 7 o'clock at night versus, you know, 10 o'clock in the morning. So
and I'll work.
Yeah, 7 o'clock at night, you're not going to get anything done with little kids.
Yeah.
When are you home?
Yeah, if I'm asking my kids to do the dishes and have to sit down with them 20 minutes later after we fought over the dishes to sit down and supervise their chemistry, we're blending our roles there.
But also,
We can't hear Bruce here.
Oh,
yeah, we can.
Are you he's off to the side. I don't think he's in front of a computer.
But a caution I could say that Bruce is raising is, as we do survey, we have to be sensitive as to the whereabouts of the parent and their accessibility in order to ensure respondents and a reasonable response rate. So what I believe Lori is asking, as we do survey, to be able to say their readiness and or ability to be able to support that level of education at home, and leave it at that, because I certainly would be one that says I would not be ready to support my high schooler in advanced math.
Well, and even the ability to move, I mean, sometimes we have surveys that only have 5% of our population responding to them. And this is one of those surveys that's not going to give us a real feel.
We do have some samples already available. We're working with Samantha, Jen Riedemann, Qualtrics, and Brad and so forth to get some quick, I mean, time is of the essence. So it won't be lengthy and detailed, but if we can at least get a dipstick, that's what we're looking for.
Well, and I would encourage that. I don't know logistically. I mean, teachers communicate with their students. If we had each teacher ask their own students, I mean, couldn't we get a certain set, especially of that Wi-Fi and computer and access? There's some questions we can have them disseminate to get as virtually 100% as we can.
That would,
Can I just jump in here?
yeah, go ahead, Katie.
We surveyed our community. We have about 1,200 households. We have about 1,700 kids. Right now, we're at about almost 900 families of our 1,200 that have responded. But here's where it gets difficult. The 300 that haven't responded could be not responding because they don't have connectivity or cell phones. So now we have to, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the hard work comes into play. You got to figure out who's contacting those families and getting the answers from them and what support they need. So it's a challenge to navigate, all of that data. That's where we're really pulling in our teachers, is connecting with those families that we haven't heard from.
Yeah, that's exactly, I think, the strategy. I mean, if you do it centralized and then you triage it that way, or you just have your staff do the data, collect it, put it into some kind of collective, collection bin, if you will. I think there's a way to do that and get as much data as we possibly can.
Yeah, Katie, I totally agree. The people you don't hear from are the ones we need to hear from.
Right. Hey, is Amy out there? Because she hasn't had a chance to talk.
I'm here. I'm just listening. I guess I'm a pragmatic person, and I think for everyone involved, we need to pick a path that does the greatest good for the greatest number of people. We have to implore our families and our community to keep an open mind, to think outside of their own household when they are seeing the decisions that are being made, and that they need to consider things that they've never considered before. So I would like to see that as part of the decision-making process. Everybody's raised great points. I guess I just need someone to bottom line this for me and tell me what's the next step.
What's next? We're rotating chairs. Hold on.
Very funny.
Okay, me too.
Making sure we're distancing.
So the question was?
Amy, and I guess collectively, is kind of wondering, what is our next step? What is the next decision?
Amy, so at 8 o'clock tomorrow, we will have a virtual meeting with all the administrators and start to sort some of this out. And at 9 o'clock, we'll have a meeting with the cabinet to continue that discussion. Much of tomorrow is going to be fact-finding as far as figuring out what's the best for Ankeny. I think people were surprised, quite frankly, that it was an April 30th deadline versus an end of the year deadline. And so I think that'll play somewhat into the discussion. The required part of this makes us stay within the boundaries of doing what the class or course was intended to do, where the voluntary allows us to be a little more creative. Aaron's point about rigor, you can make either of these rigorous. It just depends on the instructor. And it's just like all of you can think of your students' teachers, and you can tell me which are tougher than others, or your own teachers, and which provided more rigor than others through their instruction and not only the curriculum, but how they figured out how you were learning through the assessment. So we're going to be trying to sort out these things through a large group of administration. We're going to then break it down into the cabinet and then also be talking with the teachers, which have already been working in a group with Anne and but also reaching out to them. And this is going to need to be, I don't know if it needs to be expedited, but this is a decision that I can't go back on. And so whatever I check that Ankeny Schools is doing, I simply wanted tonight to have this time to share with the board what options the Department of Education was putting before us. And like I said, there's no line for the board to sign on or anything like that. And some people don't see it as a governance issue, but I see it, anything that involves 12,000 students and a couple thousand employees. I don't know what you call it, but it involves a lot of people, and it involves the 7 people that oversee this group called Ankeny Schools. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And thank you to everyone who's already put countless hours and time and innovative thought into even getting us to where we are now. And thank you for including us in the process, even though it might not be a governance issue. I personally appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you for wearing the dinosaur costume. I'm not doubting. I've heard many comments about it. And I was asked if will the dinosaur move to other sites, and I said you would have to dinosaur spokesperson.
For anyone listening, I've been dressing up in a dinosaur costume at the grab and go locations and standing and waving to the kids and saying hi with my daughter Erica. So I will be out at all the locations moving forward as well.
That's been wonderful. I did just get clarification from Anne. She got some new information. It came on the webinar at the people who missed.
Amy,
Yeah.
can you mute your line? I think.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Yep, thanks.
Yep. Anne just said that in the end of the webinar that she missed in order to come to our meeting, they did clarify that you can change plans later on in the process. If you start optional and want to update or change later to required, the districts will be capable of that. So.
Yes, that's correct.
Good.
I got another
That's good
question.
information. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Let's just say, for example, class, the teacher is on maternity leave starting mid-April. who's going to teach those kids of that class?
Well, the simple answer is a substitute. I still question, and I will question it May 1 when I'm opening the doors to 12,000 students, but I still question the ability of a school district to conduct essentially 4 weeks of school, knowing that just because we've had 2 weeks of statistically fewer deaths, that we're going to be able to open when we're continuing the 10 people rule. And when we're one of 4 states that still are not.
We're still optional.
Yeah.
Shutting things down.
As far as being
Shelter in place.
in place. So
Yeah.
And I'm sure it'll happen. For me, I'm leaving it to the scientists and to the people who are running the numbers and entrusting the lives of many, many people, knowing that people who carry don't show symptoms always. And so, we've held off on lots of things, and we haven't canceled a lot of things that some schools have gone out. We're waiting to see, kind of like the governor, to see what happens for May. But nothing will be happening in Ankeny schools during the month of April.
Well, and I tend to agree, Bruce. The likelihood is probably low, and I think we should plan on what we're preparing now is for the duration. And if we can come back, great. But I don't want to plan for 2 weeks worth of whatever and then assume we're coming back, and then obviously have to start over again in some respects. So I think the safe bet probably is to assume we're not going to come back. But with that, I think it would be, if it's not already in the works, extremely helpful to put out an FAQ about, okay, here is what happens to your student's grade. We have to figure out what we're going to do with that in any of these scenarios. And if it's here's my grade now, do I keep that? Here's my grade now if we come back and I can do this. Here's my grade now and we don't come back. I mean, that's going to be one of the top questions everybody's going to want to know. And so if we can start thinking about how to promote, whatever those decisions are going to be, I think that as fast as we can get that kind of data out will be extremely helpful.
Yeah, we're in phase 2 now, and that's why I'm with the board, and I'm not sure I'll be bringing a proclamation, but I will be bringing you the things that you need to know that under phase 2 from now until the end of the month, what will be happening for you as board members and what to expect.
Thank you.
Lori, this is Josie. Can I answer Jim's question about the long-term substitutes?
Yes, absolutely.
So
Thank
Jim,
you.
in answer to your question, as you know, building administrators and teachers plan for when a teacher is going to be out on maternity leave for a variety of reasons, and those plans are still in place and still being executed. So those long-term subs are being added to listservs and being involved in that process so that they can support the students in the way that they would have, but in the way that we are currently now as well. So that is still being addressed.
Yeah, I just thought if that didn't happen, that it maybe the PLC of whoever that was would take or share what they're doing in their classrooms with maybe the one that's missing. So I had no idea. So thanks.
Yep, absolutely.
I have a quick question too. I don't know, Anne, if this falls under academic services or if this falls under individual building administrations. But I know that we have social workers and guidance counselors in each building. I know we have like LifeWorks that comes in and has, individual counseling sessions with students. How is all of that working? Because obviously we're going to have emotional needs. So, those kind of needs for our students, maybe even a little bit more now.
Probably a lot more.
EFR is still seeing people face to face.
EFR.
Employee and Family Resources.
Okay.
And so, and that works also with students.
Okay.
And so, as well as the state has posted different organizations that are still operating on a face-to-face basis. And they said, in fact, within the last 2 or 3 speakers, seems like the governor has a speaker every meeting, but they focused on the social and emotional needs of people, and on the website they talked about the different people and signs that you should be looking for, and so.
And is that information still like
and-
in our website or in our what we
Yes,
send out? Okay.
the emotional, and Samantha has those resources up, and we continue to add to them. I would say that in phase 2, we may be looking at how to use our social workers, and I know that Jill pulled together a grief response practice for this. And so I sure hope we don't have to use it, but statistics would tell us we will.
So Bruce, are the guidance counselors involved in this piece too? Because that'd be a great way to utilize them. I'm assuming they are.
Yes, Jill has the guidance counselors
And the
and
social
social
workers.
workers.
And there's a component in our phase 2 implementation plan. There is a social emotional component as well that Dr. Durham
So Ann was indicating that in phase 2 you will see a ramp up of social emotional. I mean, we have kids that are parking cars and their parents won't let them go into each other's houses, but they will let them be 6 to 8 feet, during this year, their senior year, or maybe not, but so it's one of those things that no other class has experienced, and I can't emphasize enough the especially little kids, and having been a former counselor and starting out in elementary, if parents are talking a lot about this, little kids are sponges. And I would also say high school kids are smart enough to be sponges. And so I would encourage all to have the conversations that you need to have. And I'm not trying to tell parents how to parent their own child, because they know their children best. The best practices, and from people much smarter than I, know that there's a point of saturation that kids can only handle so much. And especially when they start saying that they need to take breaks from the news, they need to take breaks from a lot of different things, that's a good sign that especially those who are quarantined. So we are in phase 2 trying to figure out how to ramp up backpack buddies and different food services. We had, I think, 1,200, and I don't know, roughly 1,200 prepared meals. I don't know if they sold out, but almost 1,200 meals were given out. And so I think a lot of things go into that. Some people are taking 10, and some people may or may not qualify, which we said we are going to feed you no matter what. And the new rules which I was glad to see, about kids not having to be in the car, came through. So, but we continued in phase 2 to start thinking about more of the long-term implications of they've been home now for X number of weeks. So if you're a child, depending on if you're 5 or 18, what are you thinking? What are you doing? And what should they be learning? And how long? Because I think some people are disappointed that they are not taking all 8 hours. And I would remind people that they don't have the advantage of recess, they don't have the advantage of lunch, and some of the other things that they're doing at school. So,
Bruce, I really appreciate all you had to say there. I think it's really important that not only we got to be saying something to the parents about what they should say and what they shouldn't be saying, or what they should be talking about, and maybe saying, if you're spending time on school, maybe the most is an hour, hour and a half a day, because of what you just said. You can't recreate an 8-hour day because you don't have all the tools or the physical capabilities of a school.
I think everybody, and to your point, Jim, everybody's going to get burned out even
Absolutely.
another 3 weeks. So,
right.
And parents, and bless the parents who have 1, 2, 4, 5 kids. It doesn't seem to matter. They are doing their job, and they're also trying to help their children complete the assignments. And some of the assignments are more labor intensive than others. So.
Does anyone have any last follow-ups? Otherwise, we'll.
Lori, I just want to say one thing in closing, I guess, about the required and voluntary. I just feel, I guess, pretty passionately, in a district our size, if we choose to go required, someone much smarter than me once called it the Matthew effect. The rich are going to get rich and the poor are going to get poor. Those who are dealing with illness in their house, caring for family members, food insecurity, lack of Wi-Fi, we're punishing them in a system of requirement when it comes to attendance and requiring all the work and assigning grades. And I just don't think that's what our mission states as an organization. And I believe the voluntary approach, with the rigor that Ann alluded to, gives families the time and space to enter and do what they are capable of, given, they know their environment and what's going on best for them. And I think voluntary allows them to access what they're capable of. And so I would just strongly, urge the team to think about that. And I know they've thoughts of lots of things that I haven't thought about, but I just want to circle around and give my last thoughts about that.
I guess just to kind of have not an action by the board, but is there, based on what I've heard tonight, is there anyone on the board specifically who is set or strongly believes that we should go in a required direction? No questions asked.
My only thought
Hearing
was
nothing.
sorry. My only thought was at the high school level, if they're what that looks like. I'm not set. We got to do it that way, but in terms of where those students are at and what they're needing to do and everything that goes into secondary education, that would be my only thought at this point.
That if there's a segment of it that required actually makes more sense versus the other. Is that what you're saying, Aaron?
Yeah, because I'm thinking about my own daughter who's a junior and she's got a handful of MAC dual enrolled and AP. So she's already kind of halfway there. So what does the other half look like? Whether that's government or language or something else. Or I guess language is dual enrolled, but whatever those other courses might be. Again, I'm not set that has to be the route, but it is, in my mind, would be the place to start.
Okay, Bruce, do you feel like you've got it? Okay.
I think Ryan had a comment.
Yeah.
Oh, Ryan, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I can't see you.
Yeah, that's fine. I would second that because, and I totally agree with Katie. But I think if we could segment this out, I just think about this, the juniors and seniors that, they're not going to have a chance to make this up in their GPA, and they're competing, for, some of these kids are competing for some high level scholarships or positions at colleges that, they have their life all planned out already. But whereas a freshman or a sophomore, like if this year was disappointing because of COVID-19 and they weren't able to get their grade as high as they thought they might have because we went the optional route, they have a couple more years to try to make that up, to really, strive to hit that mark that they really wanted to hit. So if there was a hybrid model that where we could actually, look at a smaller number of kids that maybe they don't have the access or they don't have the support at home, or because both parents are still having to work, and or whatever the situation is, if that number was smaller, it seems like the district could maybe come up with some creative solutions to help them meet those requirements in a different way, if the number was smaller. So let's not throw out the option of, is there a creative way to do required with a smaller number of kids, type of thing? Because at the end of the day, I'm trying to think of it from a student's perspective. If we go optional, what's the motivation to do any work? I don't know what that is. And so to me, it has to be, well, the motivation is you need to do this for next year. You need to complete this work so that you can actually be in a place next year where you're not starting 2 months behind, because at that point, their grade's baked. It is what it is. So that, in my head, that's the optional route. It just kind of seems like we're just leaving it up to the students to decide if they want to do the work or not. And so we have to really provide the motivation for them and say, listen, this is why you should do this work, not because it's required, but because it's going to help you start in a better place next year than what you would if you didn't do the work. Anyway.
And in either scenario, it hurts some student. And, it's hard because none of these scenarios are great. They're all going to be less than perfect and less than difficult, and trying to figure out, maybe back to what Amy said, what's the pragmatic look at this that we can benefit the most in our community that we possibly can.
Thank you, guys. All right, we will move on to the next item on our information only, which was Durham School Services.
Yes, and this is Melissa.
Oh, I'm sorry, Melissa.
Bruce, were you going to say anything?
No, I was going to say, I was just going to turn it over to Melissa, who has been working diligently to try to come to some type of an agreement with Durham Transportation Services.
Okay, Melissa.
So we have not reached an agreement, or at least an agreement we want to present to the board at this time. Since we're deep into negotiations, I don't want to talk too much about it. I'm just going to talk generally about it, so I'm not revealing strategy. I will tell you that the main two sticking points of the negotiations are the amount that we would pay them on a daily basis to not perform work, as well as them committing to fix the issues with the busing service that's been going on during this school year. So we're working to reach an agreement on those issues, and we may not have an agreement by the time Monday's meeting rolls around. But if we reach one before the next board meeting, we'll call a special meeting to present it to you. I did want to update you as to one thing that may impact the agreement, and that is the CARES Act that was signed by President Trump on Friday. It contains a provision in there that in order for the school to have access to emergency funds, which would provide for some of the stuff that you were just discussing in your conversation about educating kids during a closure, we would have to the greatest extent practicable, continue to pay our employees and contractors during the closure. At this point, we don't have any guidance on what it means to the greatest extent practicable. We will hopefully receive more guidance from the Department of Ed on that, but that may impact what we bring to you. So that's really all I have for you tonight. But if you have questions, I'm happy to address those just generally at this point.
Melissa, this is Jim.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I would just hold fast on high expectations for their service.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions for Melissa concerning this? No. Okay, thank you. Bruce, did you have anything? No. Okay, we're going to move on to old business, which was one of the big reasons for our special meeting tonight, is that we need to set the date. I need the board to approve a request setting the date for a public hearing for $35,085,000 save revenue and refunding bond issues on April 13th, 2020 at 5 p.m. in the boardroom at 306 Southwest School Street, Ankeny, Iowa.
Motion.
Second.
Okay, I'll raise a question now. Do we need to have this recommendation include a virtual public? No, it does not? Okay. Anyone have any additional questions for this?
Do you
Okay.
want me to provide any background as to why we're?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have Jennifer do that.
Okay. The main reason we were going to go ahead and republish and set up hearings on the 13th, which requires another special meeting, is in case we are in a shelter-in-place situation on 6th of April, when we first intended to do these hearings. When we published these weeks ago, there was no, I guess, anticipation that we would be potentially under shelter in place. And what we have found, based upon our legal bond counsel, is that our public hearing notices should include the call-in and dial-in instructions similar to how everyone's participating tonight. That public hearing notice should have included those instructions when published in the paper, and they did not. So in order, on the off chance that we're under a shelter in place on Monday of next week, we wouldn't have been following the letter of the law. If we had tried to do that virtually, we wouldn't have fulfilled that publication requirement. So I guess we're just trying to play it the safest way possible by republishing, having those public hearing notices include the call-in instructions and dial-in instructions so that the public can participate if they choose to do so. And then we will still be able to hold our hearing on April 13th before the required April 15th deadline.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, anyone opposed? All right, thank you. Okay, now I need the board to approve a request setting the date for a public hearing for this proposed budget amendment publication resolution on April 13th at 5 p.m. in the boardroom at 306 Southwest School Street, Ankeny, Iowa.
Motion.
Second.
Were everyone's questions answered by Jennifer's?
We can't hear you.
Yeah. I think it's.
Can you hear me now?
Amy's.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Opposed? All right. And lastly, I need superintendent's recommendation to approve the request for fiscal year 2021 proposed budget publication and public hearing set for April 13th, 2020 at 5 p.m. in the boardroom.
Motion.
Second.
Any questions on that?
Wait a minute.
Nope. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Trying to count in my head if I have all the ayes. Okay, opposed? All right, thank you. Last item, any board member reports? Ryan, Amy, Katie?
No for Katie.
Aaron, Jim?
Good.
I don't know who that is. I think we're. No, I'm good.
Okay. I don't have anything other than thank you all for being here for this special meeting. I saw at one point we had over 200 call-in participants, so it's pretty amazing. Hopefully I had good angles on the computer. I'm sorry, what was that?
That's awesome.
Yes. Okay, I'll turn it over to Bruce then.
I would like to thank all the essential workers that are out doing this stuff that keeps our buildings running. And I also would like to extend my personal thanks to the board for this meeting and the other several meetings that will occur during April during this unique time in history. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Forget everybody. We still have a regular board meeting on Monday at 5 o'clock. Thank you. Adjourned.
Guys.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Oh, hopefully